They say history is written by the victors. But sometimes, the deepest stories are not written at all. They are carved in stone, whispered in rituals, and painted across the skies by civilizations that no longer walk the earth. Long before European ships appeared on the horizon of the so-called New World, vast empires had already risen and fallen in the Americas. The Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, and countless other cultures, each with their own languages, calendars, and gods. They looked up at the stars and saw not emptiness, but patterns of meaning. They looked at the forests, rivers, and volcanoes, and felt the pulse of divine beings. For them, the world was not merely inhabited by humans. It was shared with forces older, more powerful, and infinitely mysterious. According to legend, these forces shaped the world itself. Some stories tell of feathered serpents descending from the sky to teach humanity how to live. Others speak of lords of the underworld, waiting to test the souls of the dead. There are tales of gods who died so the sun could rise, of heroes who journeyed into darkness to bring back light, of beings who built and destroyed entire eras of time. And all of it, these myths, these epics, these warnings, were woven into daily life. They were not entertainment. They were instruction. They were memory. They were power. Yet today, when most people think of mythology, the imagination leaps to Greece, with its Olympian gods, or Egypt, with its pharaohs and sun deities. The myths of the Americas are less widely told, but no less profound. In fact, they are among the most haunting in human history, because they were almost erased. When the conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they carried steel, fire, and faith. They saw the temples of the Aztec and Inca not as monuments of belief, but as threats to be dismantled. Thousands of codices, painted books holding the stories of centuries, were burned. Entire priesthoods were silenced. What survived often did so only by accident. A fragment recorded by missionaries, an oral tradition carried in secret, an image etched into stone that outlived the empire that made it. So here we are, centuries later, trying to listen again, to hear the voices behind the silence, to rediscover the gods before the conquistadors. The question is, why do these myths still matter? Why did they cling to survival even when their civilizations collapsed? Part of the answer lies in what they reveal about the human need for meaning. Whether carved on Maya stele, sung in Nahuatl poetry, or hidden in the weaving of Andean cloth, these myths carried more than belief. They carried identity. They explained why the sun moved, why the rains came, why death was not an end but a crossing. For cultures that farmed maize on fragile soil or built cities on the edge of volcanoes, these stories were not abstract. They were the framework of life itself. Consider, for instance, the Maya vision of time. To them, time was not a straight line, but a cycle. Worlds were created, destroyed, and reborn in endless succession. Each cycle, or sun, ended in catastrophe, flood, fire, or darkness before another began. According to this way of seeing, the present age is only one layer of existence, fragile and temporary. Does this not echo, in some way, the myths of other peoples? The Greeks imagined ages of gold, silver, and iron. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, after which a new world would emerge. But in Mesoamerica, this cycle was not a distant prophecy. It was imminent, woven into every calendar, every ceremony. Each new dawn was both a blessing and a reminder that the cosmos demanded balance, sacrifice, and vigilance. And then there is the figure of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. According to legend, he was both creator and teacher, a god who brought maize, fire, and knowledge to humanity. His image appears in temples from central Mexico to the Yucatan. A serpent, because he was of the earth. Feathered, because he belonged to the sky. In him, heaven and earth were joined. Some versions of the story say he opposed human sacrifice, that he sought to lead people with wisdom rather than blood. Others portray him as flawed, tempted, even exiled. Yet across all these versions, Quetzalcoatl embodies a paradox that has fascinated scholars. A god who is both near and far, both divine and human. His story will guide us through much of this journey, for in understanding him we glimpse the heart of the American mythic imagination. But Quetzalcoatl is not alone. In the Maya world, There are the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who descended into the underworld, outwitted the lords of death, and emerged victorious. Their trials in Xibalba, a realm of darkness and trickery, are among the most gripping episodes in world mythology, filled with riddles, games, and sacrifices that echo the eternal struggle between life and death. In the Andes, the Inca revered Viracocha, a great creator god who rose from Lake Titicaca to form the heavens, the earth, and the first people. And in every region, countless other deities governed rain, maize, fertility, mountains, and stars. Each god was not distant, but deeply entwined with human survival. To modern ears, these stories may sound fantastical, but if we listen closely, we realize they were responses to very real conditions: drought and abundance, volcanic eruptions, solar eclipses, the fragility of crops, the certainty of death. Just as the ancient Greeks used myth to explain thunder or the turning of the seasons, so too did the peoples of the Americas explain the mysteries of their landscapes. But with one key difference: their myths were not merely explanations, they were obligations. If the gods gave maize, humanity must give something back. If the sun demanded blood, the people must provide it. Balance was everything. And so, the myths carried not just meaning, but responsibility. This is why, when we study these myths today, they do not feel like dead stories. They feel alive. In the ruins of Teotihuacan, where pyramids rise like mountains under the Mexican sun, the echoes of ritual still linger. In the jungles of Guatemala, temples of the Maya emerge from the mist, their carvings whispering of lords, calendars, and gods who demanded respect. In the Andes, the lines of Nazca stretch across the desert, enormous geoglyphs of animals and figures whose meanings remain mysterious, perhaps offerings to sky deities who could only see from above. Everywhere, the landscape itself is a reminder. These were civilizations that inscribed their beliefs not only in words, but in earth and stone. So what can we learn from them? Why tell these stories now? Perhaps because they remind us that human imagination is vast, and that the desire to explain our place in the cosmos is universal. Perhaps because they show us that myth and science are not enemies, but different ways of asking the same questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? And perhaps, most of all, because they prove that even when entire civilizations are silenced, their stories can endure. Burn the books, topple the temples, ban the rituals, still the myths find a way to survive, hidden in language, in art, in memory. This journey into the forgotten myths of the Americas is not only about gods and heroes. It is about resilience. It is about listening across centuries of silence. It is about rediscovering voices that once spoke with thunder and song. Over the next chapters, we will walk through jungles and deserts, into pyramids and underworlds, into stories of creation and destruction that have lasted for millennia. And with each step, we will come closer to answering the question we began with: why these myths endured, and what they still have to say to us today. When we imagine the lands of the ancient Americas, we must first clear away the map we carry in our minds. The boundaries of modern nations, Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, did not exist. Instead, the landscape was divided by mountains, jungles, deserts, and coasts, each shaping the lives of the people who lived there. These environments were not obstacles, but living participants in the mythic imagination. To the peoples of Mesoamerica and the Andes, the earth itself was alive, filled with spirits that demanded respect. In the north, stretching from central Mexico down to Honduras and El Salvador, lay the realm we call Mesoamerica. It was here that the Olmec, Maya, Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mexica, better known as the Aztec, rose in succession. The climate was diverse: steamy lowland jungles, highland valleys, volcanic mountains. Each ecological zone contributed to the myths that flourished. Volcanoes, for example, were not inert. They were gods or guardians. Rivers were veins of life. The maize plant itself was sacred, for it sustained body and spirit alike. Farther south, the Andes rose like a spine along the continent, towering peaks stretching across modern-day Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Chile. Here the Inca built their empire, the largest in pre-Columbian America. Terraced fields climbed the slopes, stone cities clung to mountainsides, and the sky was so close that it seemed only natural to imagine gods dwelling just above the clouds. The landscape was harsh and magnificent: earthquakes, thin air, icy peaks, and the myths of the Andes reflect this intensity. Mountains were not just scenery. They were ancestors, protectors, sometimes jealous, sometimes benevolent. Between these two great spheres, Mesoamerica and the Andes, lay countless other traditions. The peoples of the Amazon, the Chavin of Peru, the Tairona of Colombia, the Mississippian cultures of North America with their mound-building cities. Each had their cosmologies, their spirits, their explanations of life and death. Many are less documented, but together they remind us that the Americas were never empty lands waiting to be discovered. They were already richly peopled, with worlds of meaning layered into every forest and plain. To understand the myths, we must also understand the calendars and the sense of time that ordered these societies. For the Maya, time was sacred architecture. They recorded days, months, and cycles with astonishing precision. Their long-count calendar did not simply measure years. It measured cosmic eras, stretching back thousands of years before their own existence. To live within such a framework meant that every ritual, every offering, was connected not only to daily survival, but to vast cosmic cycles. The turning of the heavens was reflected in the turning of society. The Aztec worldview was equally infused with cosmic responsibility. Their empire centered in the great city of Tenochtitlan, a city of canals and causeways larger than most European capitals of its time, saw itself as the caretaker of the current sun, the fifth sun. According to their belief, previous worlds had collapsed, destroyed by jaguars, wind, fire, and floods. This present age could only continue if nourished by sacrifice. It was a heavy burden, the fate of the universe resting upon human shoulders. Their temples, pyramids rising at the heart of the city, were not monuments to rulers, but engines to keep the cosmos turning. In the Andes, the Inca carried a vision of order they called Ani, the principle of reciprocity. All things were connected: humans to gods, farmers to fields, rulers to subjects. If the gods gave rain, the people must give offerings. If the earth gave crops, the people must honor her. The Inca divided their empire into 4 great quarters radiating from Cusco, the navel of the world, a symbolic center that connected heaven, earth, and underworld. Their myths echoed this tripartite structure: the upper world, Hanan Pasha; the middle world, Ke Pasha; and the underworld, Uku Pasha. Life was lived in balance among these realms. What makes the myths of the Americas so striking is how deeply they are tied to geography. The deserts of Peru were inscribed with geoglyphs visible only from the sky, vast drawings of hummingbirds, monkeys, and jaguars that may have been offerings to celestial beings. The cenotes, or sinkholes, of the Yucatan were seen as entrances to the underworld, sacred wells where offerings were cast into the depths. Mountains like Popocatépetl and Tezcatlipoca in Mexico were not just peaks, but eternal lovers, frozen in stone, their tragic tale told and retold with each eruption and snowfall. To live in these lands was to live within myth itself. And yet, despite the diversity of cultures, certain themes echo across the continent: creation and destruction in cycles, the centrality of maize as both food and divine gift, the journey into an underworld, whether called Xibalba by the Maya or Uku Pasha by the Inca, the intertwining of human fate with cosmic responsibility. These shared threads suggest that myth was not an ornament, but the foundation of civilization. It guided planting, warfare, kingship, and death. It was as real to the people as law or history is to us. We must also remember that these societies were not static. They rose, interacted, traded, and sometimes fought. The Maya built great cities such as Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, where rulers commissioned stelae carved with hieroglyphs recounting both history and myth. The Zapotec and Mixtec of Oaxaca painted codices, filled with genealogies of divine ancestors. The Aztec, latecomers to the Mesoamerican stage, absorbed and reinterpreted the myths of earlier peoples, weaving them into their own vision of destiny. The Inca, too, adopted local deities as they expanded, blending them into a broader imperial religion centered on the sun god Inti and the creator Viracocha. By the time Europeans arrived, the myths of the Americas had already undergone centuries of adaptation and renewal. They were not frozen tales, but living traditions. A festival in one city might retell the same myth differently than in another. A ruler might emphasize one version to legitimize his power. Priests, poets, and storytellers reshaped the old stories for each new generation. This flexibility helped them endure, but it also meant that no single definitive version existed. The myths were alive, and like all living things, they changed. The geography of the Americas gave these myths their texture. The Maya looked into the depths of caves and saw entrances to the underworld. The Inca gazed up at the Milky Way and saw the reflection of their sacred river. The Aztec watched the sun vanish in eclipse and feared the end of the fifth sun had come. These were not abstract ideas. They were lived experiences, turned into story so that they could be understood, remembered, and respected. When we stand today among the ruins, in the shadow of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, on the terraces of Machu Picchu, or beneath the stone masks of Copan, we are not just tourists looking at stones. We are witnesses to a world that fused myth and reality so completely that they cannot be separated. The gods were not distant. They were present in every harvest, every storm, every mountain. And in that presence, entire civilizations found both meaning and responsibility. To understand the myths of the Americas, we must begin not with books, but with voices. For centuries, these stories were not written but spoken, sung, or performed in ritual. Elders passed them to children beside the fire, priests recited them during ceremonies, and poets wove them into songs that were as much prayer as entertainment. The spoken word was living. It could change with the storyteller, adapt to the audience, reflect the needs of the moment. And in this way, myth was not fixed but fluid, a river carrying memory from one generation to the next. The earliest glimpses we have of American mythology come from material culture, carvings, murals, pottery. Long before the Maya began inscribing hieroglyphs, the Olmecs sculpted colossal heads, jaguar-faced figures, and mysterious composite beings that hint at stories no longer fully known. Archaeologists see in these early symbols the seeds of later myths. The jaguar as a creature of power and transformation, the serpent as a link between earth and sky. These were not mere decorations. They were embodiments of sacred beings, frozen in stone, so that their power could endure. When the Maya developed their complex hieroglyphic script, they recorded not only dynasties and battles, but also the deeds of gods and heroes. Stelae rising in plazas tell of rulers descending into caves, emerging as divine ancestors, reenacting the journeys of the hero twins. Murals at Bonampak and San Bartolo depict rituals intertwined with mythic scenes, suggesting that to record history was always to place it within a larger cosmic drama. Yet even the most detailed inscriptions are fragments, snapshots of a much larger oral tradition that flowed invisibly behind the stone. The Aztec, by the time of their empire, used painted codices, deerskin or bark paper books filled with vivid images. These books did not read like ours. They were not linear texts, but symbolic maps of time and myth. Priests could read them aloud, expanding each glyph into entire narratives. Many codices were destroyed after the conquest, but a handful survive. The Codex Borgia, filled with gods and cosmic scenes. The Codex Mendoza, blending history with divine imagery. The Florentine Codex, compiled by Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagun with the help of Nahua informants, capturing both myth and ethnography. These surviving volumes are precious windows, but they are only fragments of what once existed. In the Andes, writing as we know it did not develop, but memory was preserved through quipu, knotted strings used to record numbers and possibly narrative patterns. Oral tradition was central, with poets and storytellers known as amautas preserving the deeds of Viracocha, Inti, and the first ancestors who emerged from caves, lakes, or mountains. Songs and rituals carried these tales forward, often tied to the agricultural calendar. When maize was planted, stories of creation were retold. When solstices came, myths of the sun and moon renewed their power. Myth was not isolated from life. It was synchronized with it. Because myths lived in performance, they could vary. One community might tell of the hero twins defeating the lords of Xibalba through cleverness, while another might emphasize their transformation into the sun and moon. One account might portray Quetzalcoatl as benevolent, another as flawed and tragic. The Inca might honor Viracocha as supreme, but in a different valley, a local mountain spirit held more immediate authority. This diversity was not contradiction. It was vitality. Myths were like constellations, the same stars, but arranged differently depending on who looked at them. The great disruption came with the conquest. In the 16th century, Spanish friars sought to record the myths they encountered, partly out of curiosity, partly to better convert the people. They interviewed elders, scribes, and priests, often translating into Latin or Spanish. Through them, fragments were saved that otherwise might have vanished. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiché Maya, survived because it was transcribed in the Latin alphabet in the early colonial period, likely by Maya nobles themselves, before being translated by a Dominican friar. In it we find the story of creation, the hero twins, and the epic battles of gods and men. Similarly, the Huaracaire manuscript in Peru preserves Andean myths, recorded in Quechua by indigenous informants but written down by missionaries. These texts are invaluable, but they are also complex, filtered through layers of translation, censorship, and misunderstanding. It is important to remember that much was lost. Whole libraries of painted codices went up in flames. Friars like Diego de Landa in Yucatan ordered massive burnings, convinced the books contained only lies of the devil. Oral traditions were suppressed, rituals outlawed, temples torn down. Yet, ironically, this destruction also highlighted the resilience of myth. Stories retreated into hidden spaces, whispered in households, encoded in festivals disguised as Christian celebrations, woven into art that outwardly conformed to colonial tastes, but secretly preserved indigenous meanings. A Catholic saint might wear the face of an older god. A procession might follow the path of an ancient ritual. Beneath the surface, the old stories endured. Archaeology has since helped recover what was hidden. Excavations at Copan reveal mythic narratives carved into stairways. Temples at Chichen Itza display feathered serpents descending during equinoxes, reminding us of Quetzalcoatl's enduring presence. In the Andes, carved stones known as huacas mark sacred places linked to creation stories. Even the Nazca lines, rediscovered only from the sky, speak to a worldview where gods look down upon human offerings inscribed on the earth itself. Each discovery is like uncovering another verse of a long-silenced poem. Yet we must approach these myths with humility. What we know is partial. We see through a glass darkened by conquest, translation, and time. The voices we hear are echoes, not full songs. Still, even in fragments, the power of the stories is undeniable. They speak of beginnings and endings, of gods who bled for the world, of humans who carried cosmic responsibility. And when pieced together, from oral tradition, archaeology, colonial records, they form a mosaic that reveals the heart of the ancient Americas. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these origins is how myth and reality were never separate categories. In the modern West, we tend to distinguish between myth as story and history as fact. But for the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, the two overlapped. A ruler could be both a man and a god, his coronation both political event and cosmic reenactment. A ritual ballgame was both sport and a replay of the hero twins' descent into Xibalba. To tell a myth was to anchor reality in the cosmic order. To record history was to ensure it resonated with divine precedent. In such a world, the boundary between past and present, myth and memory, was porous. This is why myths could survive even when so much else was destroyed. They were not confined to libraries. They were carved into pyramids, danced in festivals, whispered in kitchens, encoded in stars. They lived in people and landscapes, in rituals that no army could fully erase. And so, while we can only reconstruct them in fragments, those fragments still carry a vitality that scholars, storytellers, and listeners feel today. Every mythology needs its cast of characters. They are more than names on a page or figures in stone. They are mirrors of human hope and fear, cosmic metaphors that give form to the forces shaping life. In the Americas before the conquest, these characters were vivid, complex, and often startlingly different from the more familiar gods of Greece or Egypt. They could be benevolent teachers, terrifying destroyers, tricksters, or all of these at once. To truly enter the mythic world of the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, we must meet the beings who walk their skies, underworlds, and sacred landscapes. At the heart of many traditions stands Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His presence is among the most widespread and enduring. For the Nahua peoples, he was creator, culture bringer, and sometimes ruler in human form. He was associated with wind and knowledge, with maize and with Venus, the morning star. His form itself was symbolic, serpent for the earth, feathers for the heavens, uniting above and below. In some stories, he sacrificed his own blood to give life to humanity. In others, he brought fire, the calendar, even the arts of writing and agriculture. Yet Quetzalcoatl was no simple figure of perfection. Some accounts describe his downfall, his exile to the east, or his tragic entanglement with trickery. He is both revered and flawed, a paradox that makes him all the more human and all the more divine. Alongside him, and often in opposition, is Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. If Quetzalcoatl embodies light, learning, and creation, Tezcatlipoca represents night, sorcery, and fate. He was a god of obsidian and jaguars, of power and unpredictability. He is sometimes seen as a rival to Quetzalcoatl, the two locked in an eternal struggle that reflects the balance of order and chaos. Tezcatlipoca was feared, yet essential. He reminded people that destiny could not be fully controlled, that power could corrupt, that life was as fragile as the reflection in a mirror of smoke. Together, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca form a duality, not good and evil in the modern sense, but complementary forces holding the cosmos in balance. The Maya pantheon offers another rich tapestry of figures. Among the most famous are the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. According to the Popol Vuh, they were sons of a murdered father, summoned to the underworld of Xibalba to face trials set by the lords of death. They played ball games in courts of darkness, outwitted traps, endured sacrifice, and finally triumphed by transforming into the sun and the moon. The story is layered with meaning, a tale of cleverness against tyranny, of life emerging from death, of cosmic renewal. The hero twins are both mythic figures and reflections of everyday experience. Young heroes proving themselves, brothers navigating danger, humans confronting mortality. The Maya also honored Itzamna, a creator god often depicted as an old man with toothless mouth and sunken cheeks, symbol of wisdom and time. He was said to have invented writing and calendars, to have raised the sky after it collapsed onto the earth. His wife Ixchel, goddess of the moon, childbirth, and medicine, embodied both creation and destruction. She was patron of midwives and healers, yet also associated with floods and catastrophe. Such dual aspects were common. Gods were not confined to a single role, but embraced the full spectrum of life's contradictions. In the Inca world, the supreme creator was Viracocha. He rose from Lake Titicaca in a time of darkness, bringing light by creating the sun, moon, and stars. He shaped the first humans from stone, then dispersed them to populate the world. After completing his work, some versions say he walked away across the sea, promising one day to return. Viracocha is distant yet intimate, a god who creates but does not linger, leaving the world to its own cycles. In his absence, the sun god Inti became the focus of Inca state religion, embodied by the Sapa Inca, who claimed descent from him. Inti was warmth, fertility, and political legitimacy, a divine source of both crops and authority. Yet the Andes were filled with other powerful figures. Pachamama, the Earth Mother, was and remained central, embodying the soil, fertility, and reciprocity. Offerings of food, coca leaves, and chicha beer were made to her, especially before planting and harvest. She was not abstract. She was the ground itself, to be honored with gratitude. Apis, the mountain spirits, were also worshipped. Each peak had its own identity, protector of the people living in its shadow. To this day, Andean communities still honor these mountain lords, a living continuity of ancient belief. Across these cultures, animals carried divine significance. The jaguar, with its power and nocturnal vision, was a symbol of shamanic transformation, an embodiment of strength and the underworld. The eagle soared as a messenger between earth and sky. The serpent represented both danger and renewal, shedding its skin like the cycles of time. The hummingbird, quick and luminous, was linked to warriors and even the souls of the dead. These were not metaphors in a distant sense. They were living beings whose qualities were seen as extensions of divine reality. What makes these characters so compelling is not just their individuality, but their archetypal roles. Quetzalcoatl, the culture bringer, recalls Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity. The hero twins echo other sibling duos in myth, from the Greek Castor and Pollux to the Mesopotamian Gilgamesh and Enkidu, pairs whose trials define human limits. Viracocha shares traits with creator deities across the world, shaping cosmos from chaos. Yet the American versions carry their own intensity, rooted in landscapes of maize, volcano, and high mountains. The gods reflect the environment, feathered serpents for tropical skies, sun gods for thin Andean air, jaguar lords for jungle nights. The archetypes also reveal deep human concerns. The struggle between Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca mirrors the tension between order and chaos within every society. The hero twins' journey into Xibalba mirrors the human confrontation with mortality and the hope of renewal. Viracocha's withdrawal reflects the mystery of a distant creator, leaving humans with responsibility for their own fate. These stories are not mere curiosities. They are profound attempts to grapple with universal questions. How do we live with uncertainty? How do we face death? How do we balance human power with the demands of the cosmos? Importantly, the gods and heroes of the Americas were not remote figures sitting on high thrones. They were present, active, and demanding. They could be invoked, angered, appeased. Festivals were not symbolic, but participatory. By enacting the myths, people ensured the gods continued their work. When Aztec priests reenacted the sacrifice of gods to renew the sun, they believed they were continuing the very act that kept the universe alive. When the Inca offered gold and llamas to Inti, they were fulfilling their side of a sacred reciprocity. Myth was not only story, it was contract, and this contract gave the gods enduring weight. Even after conquest, when missionaries tried to suppress the old deities, their presence lingered. Quetzalcoatl was sometimes merged with Christian saints, Pachamama hidden beneath the Virgin Mary, Apis quietly honored alongside Catholic crosses placed on mountaintops. The characters adapted, survived, and continue to speak in new forms. They remain today not as museum relics, but as living archetypes woven into identity, art, and belief. Imagine the jungle at night, the air heavy with mist, the hum of insects, the faint glow of stars breaking through the canopy. In the heart of this world, the Maya told of another realm, an underworld not hidden below the earth in caves and rivers, but existing alongside the living. They called it Xibalba, the place of fear. According to legend, it was ruled by the lords of death, beings who thrived on suffering, trickery, and decay. Into this realm, two brothers would descend, not as gods in the beginning, but as young men destined to transform the balance of the cosmos. The story begins with their father, Hun Hunahpu, and his brother Vucub Hunahpu. These two had once entered Xibalba, summoned by the lords to play the sacred ball game. The ball game was no mere sport, it was ritual, a cosmic contest reenacting the cycles of life and death. But Hun Hunahpu and his brother were defeated, sacrificed, and buried beneath the earth. Yet before his death, Hun Hunahpu left behind his seed. From his skull, hung in a calabash tree, drops of life fell into the hand of a maiden, impregnating her with the twins who would one day avenge him. Thus were born Hunahpu and Xbalanque, the hero twins. As they grew, the twins displayed extraordinary gifts. They played the ball game with such skill that the echo of their play reached the ears of the lords of Xibalba. Annoyed by the noise, the lords summoned them just as they had summoned their father. But unlike their father, the twins were clever, cautious, and prepared for deception. They accepted the call, knowing full well that the journey to Xibalba was not just a game, but a test of survival. The descent began with trials designed to weaken and confuse them. They were led down steep paths, across rivers of scorpions, rivers of blood, rivers of pus. At the crossroads of Xibalba, they encountered four roads, black, white, red, and yellow. Each road was alive, whispering directions meant to mislead them. But the twins chose carefully, resisting the tricks that had trapped others before them. When they finally arrived at the court of the lords, they were greeted not by men, but by wooden mannequins, decoys meant to embarrass them into bowing before false rulers. The twins, however, did not fall for the trick, exposing the deception. Enraged, the true lords appeared. 1 death, 7 death, and their companions, each representing disease, poverty, fear, and disaster. The twins were ordered to sit on a bench, but the bench was a burning stone. Once again, they outwitted the trap, refusing the seat and standing proudly instead. The trials continued. They were cast into the house of darkness, where no light shone. But the twins carried fireflies, hidden in torches, to illuminate the night. They were thrown into the house of knives, filled with blades eager to cut. But the twins spoke to the knives, persuading them to be still. In the house of cold, they endured frost. In the house of jaguars, they fed the beast's bones so they would not attack. In each house, trickery and courage carried them through. The ball game itself became the centerpiece of their contest with the lords. The cord of Xibalba was deadly. Its ball was not rubber but a heavy blade, meant to kill. The twins, however, played with skill, dodging every strike. They even lured the lords into traps of their own. At one point, they substituted a harmless rabbit for the ball, sending the lords chasing it into the forest while they rested. Time and again, they turned deception back upon their enemies. But the most dramatic moment came when the lords demanded sacrifice. The twins, knowing what was required, allowed themselves to be killed, only to return stronger than before. In one version, they were ground into dust and scattered into the river. But from the water, they re-emerged as fish, then as men once more. In another, they willingly leapt into a fire, their ashes rising into the sky. The act of death was not the end. It was transformation. By embracing sacrifice, they transcended mortality. In their final victory, the twins used disguise to deceive the lords themselves. Returning to Xibalba as dancers, they performed miracles, cutting each other apart and bringing one another back to life, setting fire to houses and restoring them whole. The lords, fascinated, begged for the same power. When they asked to be sacrificed and revived, the twins killed them and left them dead, ending their reign of terror. The balance of power shifted. Death itself had been humbled. Having triumphed, the twins ascended. Hunahpu rose as the sun, Xbalanque as the moon, their father's legacy fulfilled, the cycle renewed. The Maya saw in them the eternal pattern of night and day, of mortality and rebirth, of struggle and triumph. The ball game continued to be played in their honor, courts built in every major city, not as mere sport but as cosmic theater, the living replay of the twins' descent and victory. This myth, preserved in the Popol Vuh, is among the most detailed we have from the Americas, and it encapsulates so much of the Maya worldview. Life is a game of balance, played in a world filled with traps and illusions. Success requires cleverness, resilience, and courage. Death is not an end, but a crossing into transformation. And cosmic order is not given freely. It must be won, generation after generation, through sacrifice and renewal. Told as a story, the myth is thrilling, a heroic journey into the land of fear, filled with suspense, deception, and triumph. But it is also philosophy. It tells us that the universe is not static. The humans must engage in the struggle to keep the sun rising, the maize growing, the world turning. It reassures that even when death claims us, renewal is possible. And it warns that arrogance, cruelty, and deception will, in the end, be undone by their own tricks. If you listen carefully, you may hear echoes of this myth in stories around the world. The descent into the underworld is a theme known in Greece with Orpheus, in Mesopotamia with Inanna, in countless traditions where heroes confront death to return with wisdom or power. But the Maya version is uniquely their own, rooted in ballcourts, in maize, in the deep jungles of Central America. It is their landscape, their sky, their struggles, woven into cosmic drama. For the Maya who first told it, the story of the hero twins was not just entertainment. It was a reassurance that the world had order, that cleverness and courage could overcome darkness, that death itself could be transcended. It was, quite literally, the story of the sun and moon, rising each day and night to remind humanity of its place in the endless cycle. According to the Aztec and their neighbors, the universe we inhabit is not the first, but one in a long succession of worlds. Time itself moves in cycles of creation and destruction, each world a sun, born from divine struggle and destined to end in catastrophe. The idea is breathtaking in scope, entire eras rising and collapsing, humanity reshaped again and again. At its heart lies a story of gods who sacrifice themselves so that life can continue, and of the fragile bargain that keeps the cosmos alive. It is one of the most powerful myths of the Americas, and like the hero twins of the Maya, it resonates with themes of mortality, renewal, and cosmic responsibility. The tale begins in darkness. At Teotihuacan, the sacred city whose ruins still dominate the Mexican plateau, the gods gathered to create a new world. But who would bear the burden of becoming the sun? It was not a matter of glory, but of sacrifice. The sun, they believed, was not an eternal lamp, but a god who gave its life to shine. To renew the cosmos, one among them must leap into fire and be transformed. Two gods stepped forward, Tezcatlipoca, a wealthy, proud figure adorned with jewels, and Nana-Watson, humble, poor, covered in sores. Each was tasked with fasting and purification before the moment of trial. When the fire was lit, Tezcatlipoca approached first, but fear held him back. He tried 4 times and retreated. Then Nana-Watson, with no wealth or pride, closed his eyes and leapt into the flames. His body burned, and in the sky a new sun began to rise. Shamed, Tezcatlipoca followed, but when he leapt, another sun appeared. 2 suns burned in the heavens, threatening imbalance. The other gods, angered by Tezcatlipoca's pride, hurled a rabbit into his face, dimming his light, and so he became the moon, his mark still visible in its craters. Yet the story does not end there. The sun born from Nana-Watson did not move. The sky remained frozen. For the world to function, the gods themselves had to offer their blood. One by one they cut themselves, giving life force to set the sun in motion. And so began the 5th sun, our present world, destined like the others to one day end. To keep it alive, humanity was charged with the same duty: to feed the sun through offerings, to maintain balance with sacrifice. The Aztec believed that without this, darkness would return, and the cycle would collapse. This cosmic drama was not only a single tale, it was part of a broader myth of the 5 suns, each age ending in destruction. The first sun was ruled by Tezcatlipoca, but giants roamed the earth, and in the end they were devoured by jaguars. The second sun was ruled by Quetzalcoatl, but fierce winds destroyed the world, turning humans into monkeys. The third sun fell to rain of fire, scorching all life. The fourth sun ended in floods, drowning the world, transforming humans into fish. And now the 5th sun, our own, burns precariously, destined one day to end in earthquake. Here we see not a comforting story of eternity, but one of fragility. The world is always one step away from collapse, and human action is bound to cosmic survival. Festivals, sacrifices, rituals, all were performed not merely for devotion, but for necessity. Without them, the sun itself might falter. For the Aztec, myth was not myth in our sense of the word. It was the operating system of the cosmos. What makes this story especially fascinating is the variation across regions. Among the Toltecs, predecessors to the Aztec, there are hints of similar beliefs, though the identities of the suns differ. In some accounts, the gods who became the sun and moon are reversed, or other deities play central roles. The Otomi people, living in the Central Highlands, tell of suns born from mountains, each destroyed in turn. Among the Maya, the idea of successive creations also appears. Worlds made and unmade, attempts by gods to shape humanity from mud, then wood, before finally maize. The echoes are unmistakable. Across Mesoamerica, there's a shared sense that creation is imperfect, that it requires trial and error, sacrifice and renewal. The story also reflects cultural values. Nana-Watson's triumph emphasizes humility over pride, sacrifice over wealth. The poor, sickly god becomes the radiant sun, while the proud lord is diminished to the moon. This reversal was not accidental. It taught that divine power arises not from riches, but from willingness to give. For a society in which emperors demanded offerings from subjects, the myth reinforced the principle that all, even gods, must sacrifice to sustain the world. At Teotihuacan, archaeologists have found the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon aligned with celestial events, perhaps reenacting this very story. Offerings of obsidian blades, shells, and even human remains beneath the pyramids suggest that the myth was not only told but enacted. The city itself became a stage for cosmic renewal. Later, when the Aztec encountered the ruins, they saw them as the birthplace of the current sun, a sacred site of beginnings. What is striking, too, is how the myth places humanity in the center of cosmic drama. Unlike the Greek myths, where gods act for their own pleasure, here the gods depend on humans. The sun's survival requires ongoing offerings, rituals performed with precision. Each festival was not commemoration but participation in creation. The people were not passive believers. They were co-sustainers of the universe. Of course, this belief carried consequences. It underpinned the practice of sacrifice, one of the most controversial aspects of Aztec religion. While we must remember to approach it with respect and neutrality, it is clear that for the Aztec, sacrifice was not cruelty for its own sake. It was duty. Just as the gods had bled to set the sun in motion, humans too were expected to return their lifeblood to ensure balance. It is a worldview both unsettling and profound. Life demands life. The cosmos runs on reciprocity. The myth of the five suns also framed history itself. The Aztec believed they were living in a fragile age, already foreseen to end in earthquake. This lent their empire both urgency and inevitability. Wars were fought not only for territory but for captives to offer the sun. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan, its temples rising above the lake, was a testament to their role as caretakers of the cosmos. Yet beneath the splendor lay a constant fear, that the sun might falter, that the world might collapse as it had 4 times before. And yet, there is also hope in the myth. Each destruction is followed by renewal. Each ending is also a beginning. For all its severity, the tale of the five suns is also a reassurance. Even in catastrophe, creation continues. The cycle never stops. Humanity may fall, but the cosmos will rise again in another form. This vision of time as cyclical, not linear progress, but endless renewal, remains one of the defining features of Mesoamerican thought. Today, when we stand in the ruins of Teotihuacan, or gaze at the moon with its faint shadow said to be the rabbit's mark, we are looking at echoes of this myth. The sun and moon themselves bear the story, visible every day and night. The five suns endure not just in codices and carvings, but in the sky above us, still playing out the eternal cycle of light and shadow, pride and humility, sacrifice and renewal. Every myth is made not only of characters and plots, but also of symbols. They are the recurring signs, animals, numbers, and objects that carry hidden meanings, linking the cosmic to the everyday. In the myths of the Americas, symbols were everywhere, painted on pottery, carved into stone, worn in jewelry, and embedded in language. For those who lived in these civilizations, the world itself was a tapestry of symbols, each element alive, with layered significance. To understand their myths, we must listen to these symbols, because they reveal how people saw their universe. Consider first the maize plant. In Mesoamerica, maize was not just food, it was the very essence of humanity. According to the Popol Vuh, the gods first tried to fashion humans out of mud, but the forms dissolved. Then they carved people out of wood, but these lacked souls, collapsing into lifelessness. Only when they shaped humans from maize dough did true humanity emerge. White maize became bones, yellow maize became flesh, blood was made from red kernels, and breath from the husks. To the Maya, Aztec, and their neighbors, maize was life itself, a daily meal, a divine gift, and a sacred origin. Every tortilla, every tamale, was a reminder of cosmic creation. Even today, in many indigenous communities, maize remains more than a crop. It is identity, family, ancestry. Animals, too, held profound symbolism. The jaguar was one of the most powerful figures, revered from the Olmec through the Maya and Aztec. Its strength, nocturnal vision, and ability to move silently through the jungle made it an emblem of shamanic power. Shamans were often depicted transforming into jaguars, crossing the boundary between human and animal, waking and dreaming. To wear jaguar skins was to embody that power. Ballcourts and temples often carried jaguar imagery, linking it to both the underworld and cosmic battles. The serpent was another recurring symbol. As a creature of earth and water, yet able to shed its skin, it represented transformation, fertility, and renewal. The feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, united heaven and earth, carrying the power of both. Carvings of serpents descending temple steps at equinoxes dramatized the union of sky and soil, spirit and matter. Smaller serpents appeared in art as guardians, sometimes frightening, sometimes protective, always potent. Birds carried their own messages. The eagle, soaring high, became a messenger between humans and the divine. In Aztec mythology, the founding of Tenochtitlan was guided by the vision of an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent, a symbol so powerful it remains on the flag of Mexico today. The hummingbird, tiny and iridescent, symbolized vitality, warriors, and even the souls of the dead. Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec god of war and the sun, was associated with the hummingbird, embodying both its beauty and its relentless energy. In the Andes, the condor reigned as a sacred bird, soaring across mountain skies. It was a bridge between the human world and the heavens, a messenger of the apis, the mountain spirits. Llamas and alpacas, essential for transport, wool, and ritual sacrifice, carried symbolic weight as gifts to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Even guinea pigs, often used in ritual offerings, embodied fertility and renewal. Numbers, too, carried symbolic meaning. For the Maya, numbers were not mere quantities, but living forces. The sacred number 13 represented the heavens, while 9 represented the underworld. The 260-day sacred calendar, known as the Tzolk'in, was built from cycles of 13 numbers and 20-day signs, each day infused with its own divine quality. Birth dates carried destiny, and rituals were timed to these cycles. To be born under the sign of a jaguar, an eagle, or a maize plant meant carrying a certain fate, a spiritual fingerprint written into time. In Aztec cosmology, the number 5 was central, representing the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, and the center, the axis mundi. This mirrored their concept of the universe as a great cross with Tenochtitlan at its heart, connecting heavens, earth, and underworld. The fifth sun, our present age, was itself a symbol of this pattern, balanced yet precarious, forever vulnerable to collapse. Objects and materials also bore symbolism. Obsidian, the volcanic glass that gleamed black and sharp, was more than a tool for blades and mirrors. It was linked to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, god of fate and sorcery. To gaze into obsidian was to glimpse destiny, reflection, and illusion. Jade, green and luminous, was treasured by the Maya as a symbol of life, maize, and breath. Gold, in the Andes, was seen not as mere wealth, but as the sweat of the sun, sacred, shining, imbued with divine energy. Silver was the tears of the moon, complementing gold in cosmic duality. Natural features of the landscape were equally symbolic. Mountains were not simply geography, they were ancestors, guardians, living beings. In the Andes, each mountain or APU had its own spirit, demanding respect and offerings. Caves were portals to the underworld, places where gods and ancestors dwelled. Water sources, rivers, cenotes, springs, were entrances to other realms, sacred places of communion. Even the Milky Way in the night sky was red as the reflection of rivers on Earth, a cosmic mirror of the world below. Everyday life was saturated with these symbols. A ball game was not merely athletic competition. It was a reenactment of the hero twins' trials in Xibalba, a cosmic balance between life and death. A weaving was not just clothing. Patterns encoded cosmology, telling stories of gods, animals, and cycles. A festival was not entertainment. It was the reenactment of creation itself, renewing the bond between humans and divine forces. To live in these civilizations was to walk in a world constantly speaking in signs, where myth was not confined to temples, but woven into maize fields, sky watching, and household rituals. What makes these symbols especially fascinating is their multiplicity. A jaguar could be predator, protector, or shamanic form. A serpent could mean fertility or danger, renewal or destruction. The moon could be mother, healer, or destroyer of crops. The power of mythic symbols lay in their flexibility, their ability to carry different meanings in different contexts. They were living signs, never frozen, always responsive to human need and imagination. Symbols also bridged myth and nature. The peoples of the Americas did not draw a hard line between human and natural worlds. To them, the maize stalk, the eagle's flight, the volcano's eruption, were all part of the same sacred system. Myth gave them names, stories, and meanings, but the experience was immediate. A solar eclipse was not abstract astronomy. It was the danger of the sun faltering. A drought was not only weather. It was the gods withholding their gifts. Symbols translated these experiences into narrative, making them comprehensible and addressable. Even today, many of these symbols remain alive. In Andean festivals, offerings are still made to Pachamama with coca leaves, maize, and chicha. In Mexico, Dia de los Muertos merges Catholic imagery with older ideas of the soul's journey, decorated with marigolds, skulls, and hummingbirds. The symbols persist, transformed but recognizable, because they still carry meaning that resonates with human life. Fertility, death, renewal, the fragile balance of existence. It is easy to imagine that myths fade when their civilizations fall, but the truth is more complicated. The myths of the Americas have never truly vanished. Though temples were toppled and codices burned, the story survived in memory, in ritual, in language, and in the very landscape itself. Today, their echoes can be found not only in indigenous traditions, but also in national symbols, holidays, literature, cinema, and even video games. They remain alive, transformed yet still powerful, reminders that myth never fully dies when it touches something universal in human imagination. Take Mexico's national emblem, an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. This image, displayed proudly on the country's flag, comes directly from Aztec legend. According to tradition, the Mexica people were guided by their god Huitzilopochtli to wander until they found this sign, and there they would build their city. When they saw the eagle and serpent on a small island in Lake Texcoco, they founded Tenochtitlan, which became the heart of the Aztec Empire. Today, every schoolchild in Mexico learns this story, and every person who gazes at the flag sees not only a modern nation but a mythic origin. The Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, is another powerful echo. Celebrated widely in Mexico and now recognized around the world, it is often traced to Catholic All Saints and All Souls Days. But beneath the crosses and candles lie older ideas of the soul's journey and the permeability of the boundary between living and dead. Altars decorated with marigolds, food offerings, and images of hummingbirds and butterflies echo ancient practices of honoring ancestors, ensuring their presence remains in daily life. The skeletal imagery, often thought of as whimsical, draws on a deep tradition of treating death not with denial but with familiarity, a perspective rooted in Mesoamerican cosmology, where death was not an end, but a passage. Language itself preserves myth. In Nahuatl, the language of the Aztec, words for days of the calendar carry the names of animals and forces tied to myth: jaguar, eagle, flint rain. Among the Maya, modern-day keepers still use the 260-day Tzolk'in calendar to guide rituals and ceremonies, continuing an unbroken chain stretching back millennia. In the Andes, Quechua speakers invoke Pachamama in everyday speech, thanking the earth before planting or drinking. These words are not museum relics, but living expressions of ancient belief. Archaeological sites, visited by millions of tourists each year, also carry myth into the present. At Chichen Itza, crowds gather during equinoxes to watch the feathered serpent descend the steps of the Pyramid of Kukulkan, a play of shadow and stone reenacting Quetzalcoatl's presence. In Peru, the terraces of Machu Picchu are not only admired for their engineering, but also for their alignment with sacred mountains and celestial events, reflecting Inca cosmology. Visitors may not know the full myths, but they feel the atmosphere of something larger than architecture, the sense that these places were designed as bridges between human and divine. Modern art and literature have also revived these myths. Mexican muralists such as Diego Rivera and José Clemente Orozco painted Quetzalcoatl as a symbol of indigenous wisdom, a counterpoint to colonial narratives. Writers like Miguel Ángel Asturias drew on the Popol Vuh to craft novels infused with Maya mythology. In contemporary Latin American literature, magical realism often owes a debt to indigenous cosmologies, where gods, spirits, and humans coexist seamlessly. Even mainstream cinema, from animated films like The Book of Life to global hits like Pixar's Coco, has drawn inspiration from these traditions, introducing them to worldwide audiences in new forms. The myths also echo in music and festivals. In Guatemala, the annual festival of the giant kites is held during Day of the Dead, when enormous kites decorated with mythic imagery are flown to communicate with spirits. In Peru, Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, reenacts the Inca celebration of the solstice, with dancers, offerings, and rituals performed in Cusco. Though reshaped for modern tourism, these festivals preserve the structure of ancient ceremonies, carrying forward the symbolic links between humanity and the cosmos. Even in popular culture beyond Latin America, fragments of these myths appear. Video games like Smite or Civilization include gods like Quetzalcoatl or Huitzilopochtli as playable figures. Comics and fantasy novels borrow imagery from feathered serpents or underworld journeys. Hollywood films have referenced the apocalypse predicted by the Maya calendar in 2012, though often in exaggerated or inaccurate ways. While these versions may distort the original meanings, they nonetheless show how enduring the fascination is. The myths speak across centuries, across continents. What makes them so compelling today is their unique combination of grandeur and intimacy. They deal with cosmic cycles, suns destroyed, worlds remade, yet they are tied to the immediate realities of life. Maize planted, mountains watched, ancestors remembered. They remind us that myth is not escape from reality, but a way of living in it with deeper awareness. In an age of global crisis, where many feel disconnected from nature, the emphasis on reciprocity with the earth, on cycles of renewal, feels newly relevant. Anthropologists and psychologists have noted how these myths resonate with universal patterns of the human psyche. The hero twins' journey into Xibalba reflects archetypes of the hero's descent into darkness. The sacrifice of Nana Watson to become the sun echoes themes of selflessness, humility, and transformation. Pachamama embodies the nurturing and sometimes destructive aspects of nature, a symbol that resonates with ecological consciousness today. In this sense, the myths are not only historical artifacts, but part of a living dialogue with humanity's deepest questions. There's also resilience in the way indigenous communities continue to honor these myths despite centuries of suppression. Ritual offerings of maize, coca, or candles still mark key life events. Shamans still invoke ancient deities in healing ceremonies. Storytellers continue to pass tales of the hero twins or Viracocha to younger generations. Even when names have shifted, when Catholic saints have been blended with old gods, the essence remains. The continuity is remarkable, a thread running unbroken through conquests, revolutions, and globalization. We might ask, why do these myths still matter to people who no longer live in the exact civilizations that created them? The answer may lie in identity. For many in Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Bolivia, and beyond, reclaiming these myths is reclaiming heritage. They are a source of pride, a reminder that long before the arrival of Europe, there were empires of knowledge, art, and belief equal in complexity to any in the Old World. To tell these stories today is to push back against narratives of erasure, to affirm continuity in the face of rupture. And for global audiences, these myths matter because they expand our sense of what is possible in human imagination. They remind us that myth is not confined to Greece or Rome. The gods of the Americas speak with voices just as profound, just as creative, and often more startlingly unfamiliar. They offer new metaphors for old questions, new perspectives on the cycles of life, death, and renewal. When we light candles for ancestors, when we look at the rabbit shape on the moon, when we walk among ancient pyramids, we are still in dialogue with these myths. They whisper that time is cyclical, that humanity is woven into the cosmos, that every harvest and every death is part of a larger pattern. These are not forgotten myths. They are living myths, still speaking, still shaping, still echoing in our world today. When we hear a myth, it feels timeless, as though it emerged fully formed from the imagination of a people long ago. Yet myths are also cultural artifacts, stories shaped by history, environment, and memory. Modern science has spent centuries trying to understand them, excavating ruins, decoding inscriptions, recording oral traditions, comparing patterns across continents. The result is a fascinating dialogue between myth and scholarship, between tradition and analysis, between the voices of ancestors and the tools of modern inquiry. Archaeology has been one of the most important paths into these myths. Every temple, every carved stela, every mural is a fragment of narrative. At Palenque in Chiapas, the Temple of the Inscriptions records not only the reign of King Pacal, but also scenes linking him to cosmic myths, descending into the underworld, rising as maize. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent is adorned with rows of sculpted serpents and masks, perhaps embodying Quetzalcoatl and the forces of water and fertility. In Peru, at Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca, the Gate of the Sun bears carvings of a central figure, surrounded by rays and attendants, interpreted by some as Viracocha. Each artifact is not only art but testimony, showing how myth was woven into the stones of cities. Anthropology, especially the study of living communities, provides another perspective. Many indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica and the Andes still hold rituals that echo ancient mythic structures. Among the Quiche Maya, daykeepers continue to use the 260-day calendar, guiding ceremonies with prayers to maize, rain, and ancestors. In the Andes, offerings to Pachamama and the Apis are still made at planting and harvest, with coca leaves, chicha beer, and small sacrifices. Anthropologists record these practices, not as museum pieces, but as living continuities, demonstrating how myth adapts while retaining its core essence. The rituals are evidence that the old stories never truly died. Linguistics has played a crucial role as well. Deciphering Maya hieroglyphs over the past century has opened vast archives of myth and history. We now know that what were once thought to be purely decorative symbols are in fact phonetic writing, recording names of gods, kings, and mythic episodes. Texts from Copan, Yaxchilan, and Quirigua reveal rituals reenacting the hero twins, or rulers claiming descent from divine beings. In Nahuatl, the language of the Aztec, scholars have traced metaphors, flower and song, that encode philosophical ideas about the fleeting nature of life. In Quechua, the very structure of the language reflects the Andean worldview of reciprocity and interconnection. Words are not just labels, but vessels of myth. Science also compares myths across cultures. The idea of cyclical time in Mesoamerica is studied alongside similar patterns in Hindu cosmology or Norse Ragnarok, showing how different societies independently develop visions of creation and destruction. The descent into the underworld, whether of the hero twins, Orpheus, or Inanna, is analyzed as a recurring archetype, perhaps reflecting universal human confrontation with mortality. Comparative mythology does not erase differences, but highlights both unique local detail and shared human patterns. It reminds us that myth is both specific to culture and universal to humanity. Psychology, particularly the work of thinkers like Carl Jung, has interpreted these myths as expressions of archetypes, universal images of the collective unconscious. The hero twins can be seen as embodiments of the hero's journey, facing trials and transformation. Quetzalcoatl's paradoxical role as both divine and flawed reflects the archetype of the wise yet fallen teacher. Pachamama embodies the nurturing and destructive aspects of the mother archetype. From this perspective, myths are not only cultural history, but mirrors of the human psyche, offering symbolic maps for our own inner struggles. Yet science also challenges myths. Astronomy, for example, can explain eclipses, solstices, and planetary cycles without recourse to divine beings. Archaeologists can date the construction of temples and show how alignments to celestial events were carefully engineered by human observation. Historians can reconstruct the political uses of myth, showing how rulers used stories of descent from gods to justify their power. These insights do not diminish the myths but reframe them, showing how belief and power intertwined. They reveal myth not as falsehood, but as cultural strategy, a way of binding community, legitimizing authority, and aligning life with cosmic patterns. There is sometimes tension between traditional voices and scholarly interpretations. For some indigenous communities, myths are not stories of the past, but living truths, not meant to be dissected but respected. Scholars must tread carefully, recognizing that what they study academically may still be sacred to those who practice it. At its best, the dialogue becomes collaborative. Anthropologists working with elders to record stories in native languages, archaeologists consulting communities before excavations, linguists preserving oral traditions through audio archives. Science can preserve, but it must also honor. The colonial lens also complicates matters. Many of the myths we know were recorded by missionaries, who filtered them through Christian categories. The Popol Vuh was written in the Latin alphabet, but its language carries rhythms of the Kitch oral tradition. The Huaracaire manuscript preserves Andean myths, but framed by a friar's agenda to expose idolatry. Scholars today must peel back these layers, seeking the indigenous voices beneath the translation. It is like listening to a song through static. The melody survives, but distorted. Scientific study has also revealed surprising convergences. The Maya tracked the planet Venus with astonishing accuracy, linking it to Quetzalcoatl as the morning star. Their records match modern astronomical data to within a fraction of a day. The Inca aligned Cusco's Sikh lines, ritual pathways radiating from the city, with solstices and sacred shrines, forming a vast calendar in the landscape. What seems mythic often turns out to be observational science encoded in symbolic language. Myth and astronomy were not separate categories, but two sides of the same coin. Psychology also shows how these myths continue to resonate. The idea that humanity is made from maize may sound foreign, yet it reflects a truth we recognize today. Our bodies are literally shaped by what we eat. The hero twins' descent into Xibalba echoes the universal human journey through suffering toward renewal. The Aztec vision of cyclical suns resonates with modern ecological concerns about collapse and renewal. When viewed through psychology and anthropology, the myths are not relics but timeless commentaries on human existence. Perhaps the greatest lesson science has taught is that myths are neither mere fantasy nor primitive science. They are sophisticated symbolic systems, encoding knowledge, values, and worldview. They explain the world in ways that are emotional, moral, and communal, rather than purely factual. They survive not because they are true in a literal sense, but because they speak to truths of experience, the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, the mystery of renewal. In this way, science and tradition do not have to oppose each other. They can complement one another. Tradition preserves the stories, the rituals, the meanings that communities still hold dear. Science provides tools to trace origins, decode symbols, and compare patterns across time and culture. Together, they deepen our understanding. Myth remains alive, both in the voices of elders who tell it as truth, and in the work of scholars who study it as history, psychology, and anthropology. What emerges from this dialogue is not contradiction but richness. We see the myths of the Americas not as quaint tales or lost curiosities, but as profound human achievements. They are works of memory and imagination, encoding knowledge of stars, seasons, crops, and community. They are stories of gods and heroes, but also of us, our fears, our hopes, our endless search for meaning. We have walked through jungles where stone temples rise like mountains, stood in the plazas of vanished cities, and listened to the echoes of voices carried across centuries. We have met feathered serpents and smoking mirrors, creator gods who rose from lakes and heroes who played ball games in the underworld. We have seen worlds destroyed and renewed, suns extinguished and reborn, maize transformed into humanity itself. These myths of the Americas, the stories told long before conquistadors set foot on these shores, are not relics of the past. They are living reminders of how humans everywhere have sought to understand life, death, and the cosmos. What makes them endure is not only their beauty, but their depth. They are at once cosmic and intimate. The tale of the five suns stretches across eons, yet its lesson is as human as humility and sacrifice. The story of the hero twins dazzles with supernatural trials, yet it is also about courage, cleverness, and brotherhood. Viracocha's shaping of humanity, Pachamama's fertility, Quetzalcoatl's dual role as teacher and exile. Each speaks to struggles and hopes that remain familiar today. They are mirrors of human experience, clothed in the symbols of maize, mountains, serpents, and stars. They matter because they remind us that civilizations do not vanish without leaving gifts. The Maya, Aztec, Inca, and countless other peoples gave us calendars of astonishing precision, cities aligned with the stars, and philosophies of reciprocity and balance. Their myths are not simply entertainment. They are frameworks of thought, expressions of identity, and guides for living in harmony with the world. Even when codices were burned and temples toppled, the ideas survived, hidden in language, festivals, and memory. Their resilience is itself a kind of miracle. For those who inherit these traditions today, the myths are acts of cultural survival. To tell them again is to reclaim identity, to honor ancestors, to assert that history did not begin with conquest. Across Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Bolivia, and beyond, communities continue to celebrate ancient festivals, to speak ancestral languages, to honor earth and sky with offerings. Each ritual, each story told to a child, is resistance against forgetting. In this way, the myths are not only old, they are continually new, reborn with each telling. For the rest of us, these myths offer something equally vital, perspective. In an age that often sees time as a straight line of progress, the cyclical vision of the Americas reminds us of fragility, renewal, and humility. Civilizations rise and fall, worlds collapse and are reborn, but life endures. In a world facing environmental crises, the idea of reciprocity with the earth, so central to Andean thought, feels urgent. In societies often divided, the reminder that we are literally people of maize, beings shaped by the same substance, speaks of unity. In a culture that fears death, the comfort of myths where death is not an end but transformation offers solace. Science, too, has shown us how these myths encoded profound knowledge. Astronomical alignments, agricultural rhythms, psychological archetypes, all are preserved in symbolic language. They remind us that myth and science are not enemies, but different ways of asking the same questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What sustains us? What happens when we die? Myths answer not with data, but with story. And sometimes, story is the form that truth requires. Perhaps most importantly, these myths endure because they are beautiful. To imagine a sun born from a god's leap into fire. To see the moon as a humbled rival, its craters the mark of a rabbit hurled in judgment. To think of maize not just as food but as flesh and bone. To picture the hero twins turning death into triumph, rising as sun and moon. These images stir the imagination, just as they did centuries ago. They make us pause, wonder, and feel. And in that wonder lies their immortality. When we stand today beneath the bright Mexican sun, or gaze across the high Andes, or wander through the jungles of Guatemala, where temples pierce the mist, we are not only tourists in ancient landscapes, we are heirs to stories that still speak. They ask us to see the world not as inert matter, but as alive with meaning. They invite us to recognize that every mountain, river, and seed is part of a larger whole. They whisper that humanity has always been searching, always telling, always weaving stories to connect the finite with the infinite. The myths of the Americas may have been called forgotten, but in truth they are unforgettable. They are carved in stone, hidden in words, carried in the blood of maize, reflected in the moonlight, and alive in the voices of those who still tell them. They remind us that to be human is to be a storyteller, to shape the chaos of existence into patterns of meaning, to pass those patterns forward across generations. And as long as we continue to tell them, they will never fade. In the end, perhaps this is the greatest gift of myth. It teaches us that we belong to something larger, that even in loss, there is renewal, that even in darkness, there is light, that the gods who leapt into fire, the heroes who faced the underworld, the mothers who became the earth, and the ancestors who planted maize, all are still with us, speaking through story. And in listening, we, too, become part of the cycle. So the next time you look at the sun, remember Nana Watson, the humble god who gave his life to bring it into motion. When you see the moon, remember the rabbit's shadow, the humility of light dimmed. When you eat maize, remember the Maya who said it is your flesh and bone. When you watch the seasons turn, think of the endless cycle of suns rising and falling. And when you face darkness, recall the hero twins, who descended into fear and returned as light. These are not just myths of the past. They are lessons for the present. They are whispers of resilience, humility, and connection. They are the voices of civilizations that still speak, asking us not only to remember them, but to live with the same sense of wonder and responsibility. The myths of the Americas endure because they are true in the deepest sense. Not true as fact, but true as meaning. They tell us that life is fragile, but also renewable. That death is real, but not final. That the cosmos is vast, but also intimate, woven into the maize in your hand, the mountain above your village, the stars shining overhead. They remind us that to live is to be part of a story far greater than ourselves, a story that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone. And so, the forgotten myths of the Americas are not forgotten at all. They live wherever people still wonder, still imagine, still tell stories. They live in us, as long as we are willing to listen.